why gods in general? Why is there a conversation about God or gods amongst all human cultures? So we're going to get to talk a little bit about what's called in contemporary English paganism, the idea of you have gods or that you deal with gods in your life. That'll be really important in contrast to what the Bible is going to be talking about, what the Jewish scriptures get at. So the Hebrew word for God, it translates God, but we have words in English and words in all sorts of languages that they carry sort of an assumed meaning, but we don't know what that word is actually getting at. So God is an example of that. We want to get to the base meaning of it. So the base Hebrew term which translates to God in the English language is El. This term refers in its most basic sense to that which holds power over a respective sphere of influence. Now, I'm not talking about capital G, God. I'm just talking about the idea of a God in general. That which has the capacity and agency to take a certain action towards a powerful end. In other words, a God is a being which has power and strength over the world in ways that are higher than humans. So human beings have certain agency and power to perform certain actions in the world, but there are certain agents and actions in the world that are bigger than humans. Basically, what any culture is talking about when they talk about what a god is. There are things higher than humans that we observe that have sort of power over the world. Here's a modern example that I can give of some sort of entity that has power. And you're going to sort of scoff, but just bear with me here. The algorithm of social media pages or websites, okay? That is a computer system that controls the world. It controls what you see on a daily basis. It controls what your neighbors see on a daily basis. And it's making algorithmic choices to serve you up certain content. So it's a computer program that we know was manufactured by humans, but it's just an example of what it means for something to have power that is higher. I don't have the power as an individual to serve everyone up in the room highly curated content based off of all of your personal purchases and preferences and whatever website you went on and things like that. Like that is outside of my power. It's outside of any individual's power, but somehow that power exists. And that should clue you into the idea that there are things higher and more powerful than just humans that no human really has any control over. Another example would be something like the stock market. No one controls the stock market on an individual level, but the stock market can affect every single one of our lives. It's a power in the world that influences decision making, the kinds of things that happen in the world. And some people can tap into it more than others. Donald Trump, putting all these tariffs, right? Suddenly the stock market changes, then something changes where world leaders agree upon certain terms and it starts going back up again, right? So it can be affected by individuals, but we're kind of seeing how power scales, right? So this gets into what we talked about last week about experience of directionality, about things being higher and lower than us, right? So I asked the question last week, who has the most power, influence, and honor in this image? And everyone said, no one has the most power. But who in this image does? The one on the top. Even in this setting, I can see everyone and everyone can see me. And so there's a certain level of power or ability that is afforded to me just by being a foot taller than everyone. Does that make sense? So the question for when it comes to what is a god is to ask the question, where does power and authority end? So in our human experience, we understand that there's hierarchies of power and authority. You have civilians, you have just on the sort of that bottom rank, like just everyday people, right? You have their representative leaders, right? In our modern world, it would be, our elected representatives who come from that lower level, but we elect them to higher levels, right? And then that goes all the way to the top. In an ancient context, it would be like you have the common class, you have the priestly class, and then you have the king. And the king is sort of the head of authority of a nation or a culture. Does power go beyond the king? I think is the question. Is there a power greater than the king? Is there a power that affects the king? Does power end at the king? Are you guys following me? There's something that affects kings in general that is higher than the king. There's something that affects, that you could say is the spirit of being a king, that is not limited to any one king in the world. Let's talk a little bit about, again, a contemporary example of this. What does the NFL represent in relation to any particular football team? I mean, like the organization, the NFL. The governing power. Yes, that's great. Yeah, the governing body or the governing power, that is a multitude, right? It's not limited to any one individual, but it's a list of rules and it's decision makers and things like that. And they all coalesce and they come together and then they control every game. So you see how the power is scaling beyond the coach, it's scaling beyond the referee. You see what I'm saying? Power scales up. Here's another example of talking about this. So there's a capacity for romance that each of us have, but it extends beyond any individual one of us. The question that ancient people ask is, what is the greater power of romance that holds sway over all of the individual romantic relationships, that sets up a continuous pattern that we see in all of them? I keep comparing it to modern language so that you can understand. In our modern language, if we have some young folk in our community that are falling in love, we say, she or he got hit with Cupid's arrow. Again, that's sort of a tongue-in-cheek way of us talking about the power of romantic love has seized them. So another example would be, I can be in conflict with Frank, but and that conflict can scale to be violent. But if that conflict between us was over, that could pop up again somewhere else, and that can scale up to whole nations fighting each other. So the question is, there's a power of violence and war or conflict that is greater than the sum of its parts, right? There's something that is almost descending upon the people as they are captivated in this energy. I'm trying to help us to understand what it means for power to go beyond humans, that somehow it manifests throughout the world in different ways, that are bigger than any individual person, even bigger than groups. So this is what we're talking about when the ancient people are talking about paganism. Okay, paganism is a modern term, which refers, so they didn't call it paganism back in the day, they just called it acknowledging the gods. But so it's a modern term which refers to the worship of the various powers of the world, the powers that are in the world. That's what paganism is. That the world is imbued with different entities, powers, things, locuses, things where like they brings together energy, brings together power toward a certain end. And now I'm going to focus all my attention on that thing, right? That is essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about paganism and the worship of the gods, right?
Invoking feelings.
That would be a base way of thinking about it. Invoking feelings, invoking natures, invoking powers. So what is universally accepted by the pagans of the ancient world is the idea that the world was born out of a realm of chaos, a cosmic primordial soup. Out of that, the gods begin to exist with the origin of the world, since the gods are part of the world and each hold power over a specific aspect of the world. So you're personifying these powers in paganism. You're giving a name to them, and you're seeing if you can somehow get in relationship with them, okay? For you to be able to get what you need.